All right, so we are here to have the second meeting of the day. The first meeting was about utilities and infrastructure. And this meeting, we're going to talk about transportation. So my name is Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative. The consulting team.
I'm on your way.
Talking to all of you.
I just need a corner.
And the process for these meetings is basically it's a free-form conversation. We're going to chat, we're here to learn. We have some in the city here as well, so that's very helpful. They have actual answers, facts, and they're here to teach us things. But we could just go around and do some introductions. Tell me who you are and if you represent an organization or.
Julia, lecture. Oh, we got Walmart. Fix shifts, so.
Nice.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Guide, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And you in the back, sir.
Peter Molling with Tips Miller, civil engineer. Whose project?
I'm Maureen Humke. I'm from and also with in the Amelia Tree Conservancy and work for
I'm Charles Carlisle. I'm with Bristol Development Group, and we are the developer for the project.
Susan Kellifer, my resident.
Chris Nickoloff, no representation of any organization, but a resident today.
Blair Morris, I'm with TPUDC on the design team for the proposed project and specialize in urban design.
I'm Luke Roy. I'm with Summit Contracting Group, proposed contractor.
I'm Janice Minshew. I live over off of the city golf course, and I'm the chair of the city planning advisory board.
Jacob Platt, I'm a city resident and work for the city as a senior planner.
Kelly Gibson, I'm Director of Planning and Conservation for the city of Neptune Beach.
I'm Tom Blair, the transportation engineer for Nassau County.
Amy Thompson, I'm also with Bristol Development.
With Charlotte, Block Associates, architects of housing, mixed use, and town centers.
Richard King, Island Maple.
You're starting a graduate college student, really interested in this. Sir.
I'm Rick Hall. I'm president of Hall Planning and Engineering, a transportation company in Tallahassee, and I work with good urban designers from all across the country, and enjoy working with this particular team. Richard Creed, a resident.
Cassie Creed, resident.
All right.
Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. We are recording this because others from last night asked that couldn't attend these topical meetings for us to send them to them. So we've also got these sign-in sheets, and we'll be sending them out to these emails.
So speaking of last night, who was able to attend the opening presentation? Good. So for those of you who weren't here, we went through a presentation of what we've learned so far, some information about the property, and some of our findings as far as looking at the topography and the hydrology. Tree surveys are on their way, all of those kinds of things. And the other thing was we explained the process, and it's very different than what you may have seen in the past, probably some that your family has experienced, and that normally the first time you get to hear anything about development is when they show up at the planning commission or whatever to go and get their approvals. And so all the things, the planning and the engineering design that goes into that effort happens in secret, and they show up with all their fully baked plans. In this case, we actually turned the process inside out. Till this morning, we hadn't put pen to paper, and so you all are here with us as we go through this design process. Now, the reason that we do it that way is because we know that the all of you have a vested interest in how this turns out, right? And we also know that, I told everybody last night, we know that people would rather have nothing here than development, right? That's just trees are better. That's the general mindset for most people on the island. And so we've got that loud and clear. And so what we want to do is say, well, if we're going to be doing development, and the land is, have entitlements on it to allow for development to occur, let's have it be something that is going to be the best version of development that the community can actually, I would say, like my bar is, so you guys say, no, it's not so bad. Right? That's a low bar. Hopefully we'll do way better than that. But, just being optimistic, as long as you aren't saying that's the worst thing we've ever seen, that would be the worst possible case, and probably what most people when development comes to town expect to be the result. So we're working really hard to make sure we don't do that. We're trying to think about what are the ways that if you're going to have development, how can it help improve things for you? If we're going to add people, how do we not cause problems, right? Because that's really, I don't think it's that you all don't like people, right? Because all of you, probably, I've met very many locals who are born on the island, right? Because all of you came here from somewhere else. And we're glad that the people who are here before you let you in. And so how do we let the sort of the last few groups of people, since there's not very much land left on the island, be able to come in and not wreck what you love, right? Part of that, some of the concerns we've heard, obviously conservation of trees, was one of the first and primary considerations. The second was utilities and infrastructure. So we talked about that this morning. We got a lot of good insights from the community, especially the adjacent neighbors who experience, there's issues locally. And then the next thing we heard about was traffic as a consideration or concern. And here the traffic is a few different things. One is just in the day-to-day, but then also you have this unique situation of evacuation as well. A big problem that we need to get off the island. So we need to think about that as part of it. So I am not the transportation guru. Rick is, and luckily Rick, like us, we get to work all over the country on all kinds of projects, from small projects and big projects, rural places and urban places. And so one of the things that we know is that the context is so important. The context of this place, making sure that what we're doing is in keeping with that character, that we aren't doing things that are making us have to, some of those things that you like about this place. And so we wanted to try to find ways to be as beneficial as possible. In the utilities meeting, we actually heard from the city's perspective, because this is one of the larger parcels around, that we actually can solve some drainage problems that the adjacent neighbors have by taking a bigger picture on a site like this, which is pretty great. Because when I come to a meeting like this, I say, okay, I know you all don't want development, so what's in it for you? Like, what, how can we do something exciting? And all of a sudden, there are actual problems I can help solve through this project. That's pretty good, because that's not always the case. So I'm excited to hear that. So really, just want to talk about from her perspective, transportation concerns, considerations, as daily users of the road system here, you know it better than we ever will. So kind of where you having problems currently, or if you guys like the roundabouts, and that's part of your. So yeah, how does this talk about lakes, which is cool. Some people said they didn't like roundabouts too. So there's always two sides to every coin, nearly every meeting we go to. But so anyway, that's kind of the stuff I was hoping to get out of Rick. Throw out there.
Let me show a couple of slides.
Great.
And then we'll get the conversation going.
One of the things I think would be helpful early on is for y'all to explain what are all the transportation processes that you would go through with the state in terms of your studies and how you work with DOT and how all that will work. Because I think it's helpful for people to understand that you have a bunch of transportation work you have to do anyway,
Yeah.
right? So I think it would be helpful for people to understand that bigger picture as we begin to talk about the specifics of an individual street or road.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, like I said last night too, we're so early in this, I literally don't know the process yet.
Well, I'm
So-
sure your
so Rick-
transportation guy does.
So Rick made, I don't know how, the reason I say that is I don't know how localized some of these things are, because in various places we work, there are very specific city regulations and things that you've got to do, you know, impact studies to meet certain standards, et cetera. Rick may, know exactly what you do here, but just.
Let me cover these and then we'll cover that topic.
Okay,
It's a long way out here from the interstate. Some people say it's not far enough from the interstate. But the interstate is the primary transportation mobility network for the United States. And your connection has a long, fairly suburban connector. It's a suburban arterial that gets you from I-95 to this nice walkable place. And so it's all about two things. It's all about context on the edge of the road, context on the outside of each right-of-way line, and then the facility type that on which you're driving, riding your bike, or walking. So two parts, the land use part on either side, the development pattern is called context. And then the facility itself is often referred to as a functionally classified network of streets. You may have heard that term before. They do the streets by what their function is. And the land use on either side is the context within which that street exists. You have a wonderful example in downtown Fernandina. It has a small grid of streets. That's the #1 feature of great walkability, is small block size. If you take away all the rest of it, small block size is #1. Because the small block size cuts down your speed of the motor vehicles, mainly the drivers of the motor vehicles. And then it gives you a small space for the buildings, which are either residential or commercial or industrial. And when you have a small block, you can't do a mega block that allows you to have a big box store pushed way to the back of that lot and 8 rows of parking between the arterial and the air-conditioned door that you walk in. So when the blocks are smaller, then the buildings come up to the street and properly address the street as far as a pedestrian is concerned. And you have that in spades. This is one of the finer walkable places in Florida. Now, it's a little dated. I'll give you a little hint, a little current review. These main streets in Fernandina have what's called a serpentine pattern, where your street goes along and it jogs over. It goes a little further and it jogs back. And that was the cat's meow in 1980, 1990, to jog your streets like that, to slow those cars down. And it works fairly well, but the only difficulty is from an aesthetic standpoint, which Brian and planners and architects deal with mainly, but I hear about. The aesthetics are not as good if you look down the main street and it's jogging back. Right? So that's how those two features interact. But you notice here that they've followed the classic pattern of great walkability. You have the building up to the street, you have the sidewalk, you have trees of some kind, and then you generally have parked cars, and then you generally have the lane of traffic. So building with doors right on the sidewalk, planted trees, and parking is preferable on the street for most places, and then the travel lane. What you'll see in many places is the street will be there with 2 total or 4 total lanes of traffic, and you have a little curb and you have a sidewalk right at the back of that curb. And that's not the best place for you to be walking, especially if the speeds are any higher than 25 to 30 miles an hour. So for many, many years, we did street, no parking, sidewalk, and maybe a tree. And then the building was after the parking, 4 bays of parking to push the building way toward the back. So what I'm describing is the context, really. You either have a suburban context or you have an urban context. That's it. Those are the 2 choices. I mean, unless you have industrial, university, or airport, some of those specialty places. But mainly you're either in suburbia or you're in an urban setting like this. And for 60 years, we forgot about this. We said, that's old hat, that's old fashioned. Nobody's going to do that anymore. And we sprawled out into the suburbs, and the car was king. And you had to have a parking place after you left your house for all 6 places you were going to stop during your shopping and church visit, school pickup. You had to have a parking place for that vehicle everywhere you went. I have a little analogy I'm going to develop one of these days. Your car is like a suit of armor, a suit of medieval armor, because it protects you from your environment. It protects you from the rain, which we have plenty of in Florida. It protects you from the heat and the sunshine. It protects you from other people who would seek to do you harm. It's a little lockdown rolling room for you out there. That's why people love them so much. They're so comfortable. I have a better stereo in my car than I do in my house. I have an equal air conditioner through my house and my car. So it's a comfortable enclosure. And that's why we take them everywhere we go. But it's really like a suit of armor. And when you get to the middle of town from your castle, you get off your horse, and it takes 2 people to help you take this armor off and store it somewhere. Okay, so your car needs that storage. You don't need 2 assistants, but you need to store that protected unit somewhere, and while you're going about your daily business. So obviously, the much more efficient way to do it is to get a dwelling unit that is close enough to the kind of buildings you want to visit, be it school, church, shop, restaurant. Get it close enough that you don't need that suit of armor. You don't need that car to go with you. You don't need to park it when you get there and take that armor off. So that's the basic pattern. You want a diversity of uses in a place, and you want close proximity. So those are some of the principles that explain to you the difference between living in the suburbs, driving all around, and coming into the city or living in the city where you're close enough that you can just walk or ride a bike.
One of the things we talked about for those who weren't at the presentation last night, we talked about that there are so many houses in close proximity to this site, and they were developed and designed in more of a suburban pattern. And so we actually have the opportunity now, when we start to hear about what some people are interested in, maybe having closer to their house, like a coffee shop or a neighborhood market or whatever, we can nearly retrofit the neighborhood center into what is a suburban pattern of development, and allow you to be able to meet some of those daily needs and just the things you want to do, grab a cup of coffee when you need it. It'd be nice to go get one. Now you can just walk over to get it instead of having to get in your car and drive somewhere to do it. And so there's some really cool things, incorporating these principles in sort of a contextually appropriate model. That's downtown, right? That's your most urban iteration of development on the island. And so out here, we're sort of in a more, woodland context, right? And so what's the sort of village version of that, especially for taking conservation as one of your key considerations and concerns, and sort of blending all those things together. And so here we're, be able to create the unique context. Do something that we talked about yesterday, was maybe like a Hamlet center or something.
You generally want, as far as your model for commercial activity or restaurant, you want, instead of doing a convenience store, you want to do a store that's convenient. Big difference. Okay. You all know what a convenience store looks like. 10 parking spaces right up against the glass. Gas pumps behind you. That's all oriented to the automobile. And, hardly anybody walks to those things. So you want a store that's convenient instead of a convenience store. So all these things I'm describing are the difference between the suburbs and the urban condition. So if you're going to do a conversion from your suburban pattern to a more village-like pattern, then we have to be very clever about how we blend those two. Now, there is a whole industry, professional industry of transportation engineers and planners that have been trained in how to put things together, how to build streets, where do you put the signal, where do you put the stop sign, how wide should each lane be, how many lanes, and all of that has unfortunately been trained in the suburban pattern. Most of us, I'm a professional engineer. I'm registered in 22 states around the country because I have to follow these guys around wherever they take me, and I have to be registered in each place I go. I have an application into New York to get registered in New York. And so we have all been trained in the suburban way. The suburban development pattern for streets and development context, the national standard is suburbia. If you want something different, you have to get some specialists that understand the difference, and you have to be very diligent about looking at each of the rules that are in the books on how you put things together and how you design. And you need to be fully aware of the context. And if you want the walkability, you have to fight for it. Otherwise, the default pattern is suburban. We're working in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, and we're trying to get 300 students into an old school building. It was a school building for 60 years, and then the flight to the suburbs shut it all down. Now, we got a call from the city planning department, and they said, your project is going to exceed 150 peak hour trips, so you have to go through a traffic impact analysis process. And it'll cost you $6,000 for us to review your report, and it'll take you about 6 or 8 weeks to get through it. And we're explaining to them that we have a school that is 3 blocks away where all these kids are currently. We're just going to transfer them in to this new building. And they say, well, you have to use this spreadsheet that calculates how many trips are going to go in and out and how much storage you need. So we've got a model. We just have to measure what's happening with this existing school, and just please let us move the kids. They all have the same zip codes from where they are now, but the process that they have in their planning Unified Development Ordinance (UDO) says that if you're over this peak period number of trips, then you have to go by our process. So what we the evolution of the transportation planning and engineering process is we've gotten much more procedurally oriented, and sometimes we've stopped even thinking about the reality of what we have on the table. And they were unwilling to look at the reality of moving these kids. But that's just one example of the conflict between the process that is all set up and blocked out for accomplishing a site development and the practicality of what really works and what we can then copy and put into your location.
resident and one resident.
Okay, fine.
And there's a group of residents here. So in your notes, the impact on these side streets, like Bailey, getting off Bailey, going on to 8th Street can be a 10, 15 minute walk. Times a day to get onto the Parkway can take 10, 15 minutes. So the impact of the traffic is our concern. You're taking, coming off of Bailey, we have people east coming out of Bible Mine. And the residents, people are just like speeding down these streets and not getting the wildlife to even cross. So now we've got a lot more people. If you're thinking of building residents or apartments, that's a big mistake because now you've got more people coming in with traffic. What streets are these people going to take to get to their residence? Okay, so you don't have a lot of streets going to this area. So the impact on, like I said, Early Parkway, Bailey, and then the street going to Portuguese. So we have issues on those streets. So that's something that has to be considered between urban development, no parking, or not having to attract people coming off the island to this place is important because of the traffic.
That's a good point. And, right now it's zoned commercial. And so, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is the balance. Because some people have said, well, fine, let's just leave it commercial. I said, well, okay, what does that look like? What can commercial not look like? And that's a whole other story. But what can actually happen if it is developed as commercial? I know one Publix was looking to go in here and put some parcels with a giant parking lot in front of it. And so from just a character perspective, that obviously would not be ideal, but then a traffic generation perspective too. So they're coming in. And so is it worse to have, a large scale 45-acre commercial development doing it here from a traffic perspective and then all of that? Obviously, if the option is conserve it and have nothing here, then for sure, like all day long, that being anything else given. And so I think what we're trying to figure out is from the perspective of the locals who live here, who already have issues that they're concerned about, how do we minimize those concerns? And I saw and they were going across, and the car was very aggressive. Like the geese, I thought they're going to run over them, and the geese made just enough room. The car went. I didn't even know they're going to wait. So that's a whole other thing. I did see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was.
So you can wait 10, 15 minutes. So different issues. That people came with spent a lot of money to live. And I understand, they wanted to develop a property, great, but take into consideration apartment buildings is the way. You're gonna have what, hundreds of people coming to one area. What streets are they gonna take? Bailey. Amelia Parkway.
Yeah, Parkway.
Try that, try getting off the island and during traffic. So, yeah, I understand your job, yeah, we're residents. Consideration.
A couple of things in response. Once you decide the kind of place you want, then the transportation system must be adjusted to meet that.
So if you're building up the streets,
Yep.
you can't cut another street or here. So the impact, no matter what you're gonna put, you got really one main street, and then you got two small streets. All of that.
The two major things we can do, two of the major things we can do, is control the speed of all the streets.
Right now, Amelia, that one's 45 miles an hour. The Parkway. So it's really fast.
And then control the access points. If you have a long wait to get out on any particular street, then that's a consideration.
Yeah,
It needs to
we
be addressed.
control the intersection.
Yeah.
Bailey at 200 or 8th Street, we need to be a control there.
As opposed to there's a roundabout there right now. Right?
No,
No.
At 8th Street, there is
Oh,
no
I think,
roundabout
I see,
there.
I see.
And if you haven't had the privilege of being at that intersection in the morning,
What time? That's
I would say if I go to volunteer at That's Angel Land, be there at 7. So say 7:30 so.
Yeah.
Because one of the biggest things that happens, and that is not gonna change because it's the economic engine of this island, are the lumber trucks. And they are all day, but when you add in the people coming on the island to work from west, that a huge flow of traffic. So there needs to be a level of sensitivity because those are all people that are coming here to work to do stuff. And you're right, there really is nowhere to make a left turn at that hour. in the morning.
Yeah, it's pretty much all day long anymore.
It's all day long.
I couldn't watch it, and I also cheat. I cheat because I go around to the Parkway where there's a traffic light control intersection. And I don't care if I have to wait through 2 seconds, I can make the same left turn.
Yeah, most people are gonna go west.
Yeah. I
It's
can do
not up to there.
So those are situations that are of long existence, that those of us who live here understand and have figured out how to kind of work around. But when, and I love the concept of having a village center that I could walk to. And I love the concept of that. But we need to address the fact that there's still, people are not going to use their feet 100% of the time. People are not going to use their bicycle for 100% of the time. So there's going to be a certain amount of car traffic that's inevitable. And we have some of the best beaches where people come all the way from Jacksonville or close to that, and from Georgia to go to the beaches here. And the weekends have a lot of traffic also. So don't even mention traffic. It's slow. I'm calling it back in. Okay, so we're all aware of that, but it's still a lot of driving forces that are not under your direct control. And that needs to be weighed in the whole thing. Now, if you can get them to build parking lots on the other side of the bridge and bury the people in buses and let them ride bikes on the highway, would you sign up for that one?
So if you're a tourist, you have to be on a bike, right? You know the idea.
Yeah, but no, but you understand
Yeah,
the
yeah.
point is that.
Well, and one of the things that we were thinking about too is like, how can we help solve some problems or not make them worse at least, you know? And there's this idea that we talk about of internal capture, right? And so one of the things we're thinking about is, are there ways that we can incorporate some workforce housing? We've heard it's a need, people have asked about it on the site even. Can we incorporate some of that so that not every single person who's working around here is coming from Belay, you know, from Long Island or whatever? So that, you know, it'll be a small, you
It'll
know.
be a small percentage because a lot of them are military spouses. I would really like to hear the answer to this conversation
Yeah.
from Denise. And the reason is because I think what we're sort of getting at is the big picture, which is we have city roads, county roads, and state roads. And so to me, a lot of the decisions are made for Bernardino without necessarily our input. If you're building out 200, nobody came and asked you what I thought about it. Might have had an opinion, as we all know, but it impacts all of it. So I appreciate this gorgeous picture of our town. But to tell you the truth, that does not help me. Okay, that's not what this is. But that to me is, so if you walk around, and I think all of us have done it, you go to a restaurant, to the beach, and meet somebody, and you say, oh, you just moved here, why did you move here? Sense of place, the beaches, the trees. No offense, that's not the destination. Okay, and so I think we have to understand that sense of place. When you talk about what's going on nationwide, say with city streets, those kinds of things. I've not read one piece of research that talks about how that works on a barrier island. We have a different sense of place. We have a responsibility to protect the island because it also protects the mainland. So I to me, your question was really important. because I think
I just think you need to understand what are all the players when you
Yes, that's
come
right.
to transportation planning.
Yes.
And because you have 3 jurisdictions that manage your streets, they're all gonna have different rules. So depending on, the Parkway is a state, is a county, but 8th Street is a state road. The Parkway is a county road, and then some of the other, like Bailey Road is a city street, right? County too, and then part of Fort, they're all intermingled. So you just need to figure that, I mean, you just need to understand what those implications are and what does the county bring to the table in terms of their traffic planning requirements and how that all, plays together.
Let me give you a bit of encouragement on that with multiple jurisdictions and the planning and design and engineering that's go on. This context classification process. A former employee of mine, Dwayne Carver, is now the state complete streets coordinator for the whole state of Florida. He worked for me for 10 years. And so he knows, he's been in many a charrette with Brian and with Dwayne and with Topical. So he knows what he's talking about. And what he has done with a team of consultants, they have put context into the design manuals for Florida DOT. They completely rewrote their plans preparation manual, and it's now the Florida design book. And it's based on context. So you have a right, who was saying you were not asked. Now you have a right to go to a DOT person and say, our context is walkable urban. We're a C4 area, C5 area, that's what they're called. And we have a right to see this street designed in a more walkable, bikeable, and still drivable manner. Even the federal highway, which has the AASHTO Green Book that all of us understand that are in the business, that's the Bible on how you do street and highway design. They have 5 levels of context. They just adopted a year ago last fall into that book. And they're now doing a lot of research to figure out how to do this.
Well, the reason why we don't know the answer to the question at this point, I don't know, is because we think about the place, what the community is looking for, what we think are best practices and all that. Then we go look at the rules and regulations and see, okay, well, how do we actually accomplish this thing that everybody wants? Because half the time the regulations, to Rick's point, would say like, oh, you need to make this a 6-lane highway in Amelia Parkway, regardless of our development or not. And it's
Well,
like,
that's
that's
none of
not,
that.
that doesn't make sense, So
That's
we
not
work
correct.
around where you're
No, I was just gonna say that, aren't there ways to calculate volume of traffic or increase the volume of traffic? And that is all, sitting here trying to speculate about roadways, I think it's a little premature because isn't it dependent on what actually goes in? So if you have more multifamily versus commercial, that'll have a different effect on the volume of traffic.
Yeah, but I mean, some of the things, like a meeting like this, the most beneficial thing for us is to learn where these issues are, particularly pointing like, oh, here, this is the problem, that's the problem. And then, so like, oh, well, if we could get around this way, that'd be better. Or like, I know people like, oh, the city should just buy this land, right? And just make it green forever. Well, maybe one of the things that would be more reasonable, affordable thing to do is to buy one of the houses on the back of this Alton May. One of the houses on the back of Alton May that butts up to the road that nearly comes right up to your development, and put the road through there. And now all of a sudden you don't have all your traffic on the big road, right? So some of those kinds of things, thinking through, but you don't think of it that way because you're like, oh, well, we're a neighborhood and we happen to all pour out in this one intersection. And you say, God, this traffic here is so bad, and really it's you, right? You are your own traffic, right? It isn't always, it's not just the newcomers. As I said, show of hands, how many people are from here, right? We have one, it's all right, so far. So, but, so we don't want to do things up, but I think there are some things we can do. And one of the earlier meetings, people said, the neighborhood over here, oh, we should cut the street off. I said, okay, well, you can't cut off the street and be concerned about traffic problems.
And connectivity.
Because the more streets we cut off, the more problems we're gonna have with that. So we want to make as many connections as we can, but it's not lost on us, is the point you all made. We don't have many roads to connect to. You know, it's darn this airport down here, you know, or whatever. And so trying to think through that. I was even looking, I don't know, how many houses are on Grand Island? A lot, like 100? Right, when it's a full build out that we have.
113,
It's really
So
small.
it all-
113,
So
says
it all
Jay.
comes out through here, and I was thinking, well, you know, kind of looks like the road wanted to go across here, you know, and so, you know, if there was an opportunity for us to tie into that, and now that could go there, so not all their traffic has to go through. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about, looking for that sort of outside the box, not just worried about our own project or our own site here. Those are the things I'm thinking y'all might be able to, big ideas you may have had for your city and traffic.
So would that be something on, just on a couple of quick things, and we'll get right to you. On Fort Myers Beach, we did do a parking lot on the other side of the bridge and shuttle people over the bridge to Fort Myers Beach and back to their parked cars in the shopping center on the other side of the bridge.
There are,
Not entirely.
There's lots
a
of-
question.
sorry, there, we have made a lot of those suggestions. So there's a list of things like that we as citizens have made. But it gets into where it's the partnership between the city and the county and the state.
Mhm.
So once you cross that bridge, you're into somebody else who has to agree to do it. And I think that's where.
The best transportation planning is done with a near disregard for jurisdiction.
I would probably, we.
So,
Well, I'm taking two ideas.
Oh, no, I was, we had talked about that, where the relocation of Amelia Island Parkway to the back adjacent to the airport and make this the local destination. So you would split and have basically the through traffic that has to get all the way out to 200. And this little local destination that could be this, because this cannot be Amelia Parkway. I mean, it'd be a disaster to have that. So, but you could make it two. I don't know if you've been in Detroit, they have a road where one's an 8-lane divide and the other one goes to downtown Birmingham. And it's really cool. It's, I mean, it's off the same road. It's the old road versus the new road.
Right.
So it's really neat. So it's just understanding the context back to what he was saying. And I just, so that would be something to at least think about. I think it's kind of neat both. And downtown Orlando's got a Publix in the middle of downtown Orlando. If you've ever seen that. It's really neat. It's on top of high rises, but it's a little Publix.
So you want high rises?
No. I'm saying, when you mention Publix, people say Publix and go, oh my God, I don't want a Publix anywhere near them. But yet, when we looked at the context of the Publix in Orlando, it's a teeny little Publix. There's no parking anywhere around except for parking above for the condos and the public rents some of those spaces.
Publix has an urban format.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
It's a really neat thing. And I mean, you can't even tell it's a Publix except for a little green sign that's about, about 4 feet tall.
Right.
I've been to 10 Publix urban scale stores. One more thing on general principle. The context is number one. And then another close factor is speed of the motor vehicle. If you decide the context is going to be walkable and pedestrian friendly and village like, the speeds have to come down. Period. And then you worry about volume. If you're out in the suburbs, volume is number one and speed is number 4. Go as fast as I can. I'm in the suburbs. I gotta get there because my favorite store is 8 miles away. Okay, so that's why we got helter skelter in the suburbs with the fast driving and the high volumes, because everybody wants to go a long distance at a high speed. And so those principles have to be set aside when you get into different contexts, like it sounds like the kind that you want. So think about those kind of principles. And finally, build all the network you can. Because that's what they did before cars were invented in front of the village. That's why you had those small blocks, because everybody wanted that, because they didn't have cars before. before 1900. Okay.
So we'll have to do all the studies and all that stuff. I'm sure we're gonna learn more about what the process is around here. It's different from place to place to work, but.
Yeah, I had a question since we've got Alta May folks here. How many Alta May residents know there's a tract of land that was dedicated for secondary egress that connects to the Simmons Road Trail?
Yes,
Huh?
down at the end of Spanish Way East.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an idea of where there's an existing connection. You mentioned buying a house. I think it's a 30-foot tract. that
Right.
goes off.
Yeah, and there's a fence
cul-de-sac.
there. People use that to access the trail. Yeah.
And so that's, it's an area connection that could be better utilized.
One quick thing, we're working in South Carolina on a place called Johns Island, which is
Charleston.
just near Charleston. And it has many similar characteristics to your area. And the county doesn't quite get the walkability issue yet up there. And so we're with a private advocacy group that is fighting these potential 5 different roadways that they want a 4-lane across Johns Island. And every one of those color lines, that's not a river, is a proposed 4-lane highway.
Obviously, it's bigger than Amelia Island, but that's a lot of asphalt and a lot of exhaust.
It's not a lot bigger. This
But I mean, there's
serves,
no talk of 4-lane in this. I mean,
No.
Not talking.
I know,
That's not
but
even
but it just
considered.
goes to show you
So
what
it's
stupid
not-
ideas people think.
Right.
Well, I mean, we know, we can see those all over.
I should ask the county, are there any proposals for 4 lanes?
For this area, there's no proposal for 4-lane, but I do want to mention that we're under design for a trail, Charity's path that runs along that side of the road. So something to be able to look out for as far as access points when we get to that.
Now, is that gonna be, are you gonna put shoulders as well, like buffered bike lanes as well, or no, is it just gonna be a?
Right now, it's a 10-foot Charity's path that's off the road,
Off
so
the
it's
road.
not any road work.
So it's the continuation of the one that's come up from Jacksonville,
Right. it
right?
ties into-
Because
yes.
I saw it on the TPO, it's like scheduled for 22 and 23 and 24.
That's the one.
So there's no shoulder addition to be done.
Not at this time.
Because there are bikers that don't want to get on those, they want to stay on the
Right.
road.
So it's
And
the,
that's one of the things.
Yeah.
we've always
so
seen
it's
at
the
end.
one that's, down by the plantation.
Yeah.
So it's gonna
Yeah.
just follow the Parkway, by Lost Robles, by the, and
Oh, that'd
then
be cool.
all the way
Yeah.
to,
But it's good to put the shoulders,
all the way to 200.
because we see the people with the spandex.
And you're gonna be up looking at that street. I never thought about it.
if you want to be
I
here.
know that.
No, it's like the one that's down by the plantation.
Tiny little
I know
trail.
that the
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah.
Federal transportation, the regional, the state transportation, all use phrases. As a matter of fact, Elton Jane is well known for getting public input. I think the word that I hear a lot is robust input. Did you heard, you actually reminded me of how important that is, because often the people that are sitting in the traffic have the innovative ideas of how can I get out of this, or how can I be more walkable. So my question to put you on this spot is, how are you getting input, not just from county, but also from city residents? So that, our neighborhood is big, so we don't, we feel left out sometimes when the county comes up with ideas, even though we border out the county. So how do you let all of us know?
So we actually have an upcoming meeting. It's not scheduled yet, but we've been coordinating with the engineer of record to schedule something with all the residents within a radius of the proposed project. I'm not sure what the boundary is, but it should be, we'd include city residents in that, at least for this trail project moving forward, and we can determine other projects, what kind of residential boundaries we need to include it with everyone.
That would be great, because I was looking at the list of projects
There's a
on
lot.
the website, and
Yes.
and impressive, I might add. It's a wonderful, document. You actually have my list of costs, it's impressive, but nonetheless,
Oh, boy.
no, I just have my list. It's not, it's just a clarification, but that was one of my questions, is how, now that all these are defined, including the Mail Road, what is the public's
Right, we can make sure we include everybody. I think we typically do a news article as well, an ad in the paper. And I think we can do a mail out as well.
One of the things we talked about in the last meeting was, we see all of the trails and all of that as a huge community. Not just for all of you, but for the site as well. So the more that we can tie into those and incorporate them in, and, everybody's been talking so fondly about the trail through here right now. And, when you go out there, it's nice that it's there and it's accessible, but I would, you're not making postcards of it, right? Comes in front of the beach, the Arts Trail, at least not this segment. And so we're thinking, is there, some way to tie into that and bring that into the site and have like the really cool sort of, wooded portion of it that really adds to it and maybe becomes that postcard moment along the trail. And then we took it one step further to say, can the Arts Trail actually have art on it? And so I have a few ideas.
So there's no long range transportation plan to widen Amelia at all? Because there's huge roads. I'm just wondering, it looks like a lot of
The
roads.
only improvement that we're looking at in the near future is potential roundabout at the intersection of Buckingham Trail and AFE. Parkway. But as far as widening, that's not something that's currently on the radar.
So right now it's showing 2 lanes all the way out in the.
I can double check that.
Yeah.
Let me double check that in my notes. I'm pretty confident it's just planning 2 lanes.
Let me ask the city participants. Dover Coal and Partners has been selected to do a study with the city. Is that correct? No.
Not to my knowledge.
No. Okay, I thought there was some consultant advertisement.
There was, they may be a sub with the WGI group on our Vision 2045 and update to our comprehensive plan and then future land development code amendments.
Okay.
I think they might be a sub consultant on that team.
Yeah.
But we've not worked with them directly as of yet.
Okay. Okay. What is the nature of the other, the overall study?
At this point, it is a larger vision plan that we're working on in preparation for October fall timeframe, looking out to the year 2045 and trying to understand what our needs are as a community, where our strengths are right now, and what we need to prepare for as we move into the next planning horizon. And then from that, we'll see policy level recommendations as well as programs and infrastructure recommendations about different improvements that are needed.
So it's a comprehensive plan update, is that what you?
No,
The next step would follow, so right now it's just a larger, broader vision.
So it's a visioning study.
Right now.
so we had a Vision 2000 and then we had a Vision 2020. They're nice books that are sitting on somebody's shelf. And so now we're going to create another one and we're going to call it Vision 2045. And hopefully this one, we really worked hard to get different aspects of the community's input in different ways than the others have ever been done. And so our plan is for that document to not only be able to sit on somebody's shelf, but also to have a lot more actionable recommendations. Then the next phase would be to move into re-looking at the comprehensive land use plan. And then the third phase would be a rewrite of the land development code. Because it has been piece part updated since 2006. So it needs a big refresh.
We worked on Neptune Beach recently, and did that kind of vision plan for Neptune Beach with Dover Coal Partners as the lead on that project. And the reason I'm bringing it up is so everybody will be aware that that's where more active citizen participation is really needed, because that's the vision that leads all.
We actually got a good amount of citizen participation. We've gotten well over 1,000 surveys, which is very unusual for this community. And we did outreach at a Juneteenth event over at the Peck Center. We've done an outreach at Central Park. We've met with all the Black ministers in town. We've met with the mills. So a much broader approach than has been done in past visioning.
That's great.
So we've worked hard to get, we even have a teenage student survey, because, I want to know what would make a kid want to live here.
Yeah.
Not so much what a 70-year-old retiree wants. I already know that because I'm one, but I get that piece. But I want to know what makes a 20-year-old want to move back here after school and live here. What makes this young man here want to live in this community for a long time and raise his family. And I think that's what's important in a visioning document as we move forward. So that's been our focus.
One encouragement I would have is make sure that it's context-based, that you get the context of whatever your vision is, being rural, suburban, preserve, whatever the context you want, make sure that gets in the vision, and then it gets in the comp plan, then it gets in the land development regulations.
So we're happy to share with y'all as we move forward, whatever we'll have preliminary information in September,
Late August.
late August.
We
So
should be seeing draft
we
plans
should
as
begin
well
to
as
see
funds.
draft stuff. So we're happy to, get it out to y'all, because I think it'll help you in your context of what, what people think about the community as a whole, and then how that might impact this development.
We have a draft report into Panama City, downtown Panama City. It's not the beach. And we've been working with them for 2 or 3 years now. And they have set context zones. And this report is called a complete streets ordinance for the city commission to pass as an ordinance. There are about 1,000 complete street ordinance in the whole nation. Neptune Beach had the number 6 plan in the entire nation of complete streets. And it tells you, if you have this context, then, page back over here, this is how you build the streets. It looks just like the earlier slide.
Yeah.
It would look like this if it was a rural street.
Right.
So it ties land use and transportation together for almost the first time ever in a complete ordinance. And it's going to be very, very helpful.
I'll be looking forward to seeing that draft.
I was just wondering, is the development, is it all city, or is it broken
So
city and
the
county?
2 parcels on the west, the big one, the others 2, that's in the county, and then the 8-acre one's in the city.
So I'm just curious what the plans are. If this is county, then the city has no jurisdiction.
Well, normally what happens is if you want water and sewer, the city provides water and
Right,
sewer.
and they would need a petition. to
And then
annex,
they would
correct?
annex they would annex those 2 parcels in, and then it would all be under city
So
jurisdiction.
would it be annexed prior to development then?
Yeah, so typically you do the annexation, and then you sort out, the PUD in place, and then you develop it. So we've talked with the county and the city planning departments to try to clarify that process and make sure that we do it the right way.
We're actually doing annexations almost every month now in the PAB on much smaller pieces of property. Because as you know, the city limits are very gerrymandered.
Yeah.
And,
No.
That's a good
yeah,
word for it.
yeah. And so we're seeing small parcels come in, and it's primarily to get on, so they could get on
Sure.
sewer
Right,
and
right,
water.
right.
In fact, we have one last month, we have one this month, we have them almost every month now.
Amazing.
So,
Sure.
I put this together very quickly, so there are just a couple more slides. This is a rural section on Johns Island, South Carolina. And there are a lot of homes that are just beyond what you can see here that are on one side are on a river. So the homes that are on a river that box. And so you'll go along this road, you see 1 mailbox, 2 mailboxes, a gang of 7 mailboxes. And there was not even a no passing zone through this straight stretch of road. So we're going to do this. We're going to say this, reduce the speed limit from 45, where the postman stops in the lane to put letters in these mailboxes in the middle of the day and blocks a lane. So the speed limit's going down, warning signs, caution, driver care, and no passing all the way through this half-mile stretch. So we can make these kind of recommendations based on the context, and based on the use of the street, and based on the safety. Safety is still always up there near the top.
We were actually working on the zoning on John's Island years ago, and they have these, right around John's Island. For those who don't know, it's like Charleston, and you go over the bridge, to James Island, you go over the bridge, to John's Island, so it's right there.
And then there's one
And
line.
it says, John's Island rural forever, that these bumper stickers that everybody has. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And you can see why with these photos. As we started looking at the current zoning, apparently the residents hadn't. At some point in the 70s, I think, for whatever reason, somebody had the bright idea to change the zoning. It was zoned for 22 units to the acre. The whole island.
Holy crap.
And then we were like, guys, I don't like, only because the market hasn't made its way out here yet. Is it, are they not high rises that can see the ocean from here, you know? And so we said, well, what are we gonna do? And so we don't really like the down zone. It doesn't take it. So he's like, oh no, we get sued all the time. So let's do what's the right thing, what we need to do. I was obviously the dumb thing, a mistake, let's fix that. And so he said, well, maybe there's an intermediate solution in that you can, the people who bought land think that they're gonna be able to do something with it. Maybe what we do is we look at, we say height is limited to no taller than the tallest grand flag oak. So there's like a common sense reason for that height limit, not a random number. And then we said, maybe you then have to leave a buffer a certain distance, but you can still see through it. So there's a restaurant called Fat Inn.
I love that
Yeah,
restaurant.
it's so great. And
It's
so we're like,
good.
okay, well, Fat Inn, that frontage feels really good. So rather than setting an arbitrary buffer, it's okay, the Fat Inn is this far back, it's that. So we did kind of a Fat Inn model.
I understand it's closed.
What?
It's closed.
Oh, no.
No, I know. It's very sad.
There you go.
It's very sad.
And then you can put your density behind that, behind the
Yeah.
trees, and you also have to interconnect the parcels one to the next. So now all the traffic isn't going out on Bohicket and all these other roads, and so you have this secondary network of streets, so we're solving traffic problems with development.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
These are speed limits we're lowering. The red or pink color is the existing set of speed limits, and we're recommending all those in white. And as you go down Maybank Highway, there's a kind of a strip that goes from River Road all the way down to Angel Oak. And you see that we have an alternating pattern of slow in kind of a development node, and then intermediate for the place in between, and slow again, intermediate and slow again. And that's important because this is where most of your walkability is going to occur.
Okay.
25
I didn't do
mile
that
per hour.
today.
May I ask a question about that?
Yes, sir.
Do you do things other than just change the speed
Oh,
limit?
absolutely.
Because otherwise you don't change
That's
behavior, right?
No.
Exactly. Now,
So how do you, what kind of,
yeah, putting the sign in the ground is only one of the steps, and that gets you enforcement. But you allow the buildings to be developed closer to the edge of the right of way, for one thing, and that gives enclosure. And drivers will slow down with that.
but that's only as new development first.
Yeah. Now you can plant, we normally specify trees on 30-foot centers. And the same species goes down the street. And if those get put in well, then the shade trees help the pedestrians and they help park cars, but they also give the drivers a sense that they need to slow down. It's a subliminal message when you see those trees going by that you say, I'm really not supposed to be speeding here. Now, if you're on the interstate, like I was this morning, trees are way back. They're hardly moving as you go by at
80.
79.
79.
So
That's fine.
they're not going to slow you down on the interstate, but when you get them right next to the back of the curb, those trees will slow down the drivers.
There are parts of the
There are
Parkway,
20 other things that we do
Yeah.
to get the slowdown.
but there are parts of the Parkway that are 35, because they're 35 by my house
Yeah.
near where Via Del Rey comes out, and people don't People don't slow down at all.
Yeah.
Not, I mean, they speed around that curve. They speed around that curve.
But if the road, or the road conditions change.
No, they don't.
won't
No,
do
no,
that.
there's no reason for people to slow down except to sign the road's the same.
What's the best part of the road, like Amelia Parkway, the most beautiful scenic, favorite part of it?
Bailey and Amelia Parkway.
So this right in here is the best example.
Buccaneer Trail,
Buccaneer Trail, Buccaneer Trail, yeah.
Buccaneer Trail.
which is a canopy, part of it is a canopy road.
And the canopy that
All the way
goes down
south.
first to-
Yeah, that's Buccaneer Trail.
So the trees help make that one of the better places.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
The
it's pretty.
canopy's
Yeah.
Crazy, and then one of them, and the one part of Buccaneer Trail, which is kind of funny, is that the tree, the road goes around the tree a little bit.
Yeah.
Which I found kind of
But the
interesting. I haven't seen that
speed
before,
limit-
but
the
that was
speed
kind
limit
of
on
huge.
30 miles an hour.
Right, because you can't drive fast on it.
The canopy, it says canopy. I'm new to the area, so.
So Buccaneer Trail was
Buccaneer
really
Trail
there
is
before
really
the
nice.
Parkway was there. It's the old highway.
It's a canopy like that, it looks just like that.
Yeah.
The one you showed.
And back to when I was saying, you know, like if you just sit in a restaurant, oh, why did you move here? The beauty, the trees, you know, always comes in the conversation. The beach, the wildlife,
Same
the
thing's
small
happening,
sense of community.
the same thing's happening in Johns Island. We got 780 responses to a survey. And this is just a pirate group that wants to stop all those five
Yeah.
highways from being wide.
Mhm.
These are two magazines that came across my desk, and they kind of reflect last century and this century as far as engineers and planners. This is the Florida Engineering Society Journal over here, and they're saying, oh, we got 3D design for transportation, and we can do these crazy flyovers like we did in Miami in 1970. And that's what they're celebrating on the front page of their bloody magazine. That is so last century. Nobody's going to do this anymore. Okay. But look on the right side. This is the Institute of Transportation Engineers Journal. And that's this century. This is innovative intersections and streets. And look at that. That's walkability right there. That's in too large a town to suit you. But the idea that they're talking about trees and look at the pedestrians all over the place. This is the way things are going. City, county, and state. It doesn't make any difference. Federal level, they're joining in this kind of revolution on how you do transportation. So it's very encouraging. I've been working for 50 years, and I've moved from the left to the right on this, and I'm really thrilled about it.
All right, so we are 11 minutes over. Do you have more slides?
That's it.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't say this at the beginning, I guess, but Rick is he has been around since the reinvention of walkable neighborhoods. Rick did the transportation work on, if you know, Seaside or Florida, the Panhandle, the first new walkable town in 100 years. So probably that was Rick had his work on more of the sort of walkable village project around the country than probably any other transportation engineer. So he's always got a million stories, which is great because I'm like, oh, you can see this or that or the other. So
And his role, I was just talking to Jessica about it, his role being able to be a transportation engineer, which is typically the person that stands in the way of walkability and says
Right.
no. You having the credibility to be able to talk to them, bring them down to earth, and really start that conversation was so key. So
yeah.
we're lucky to have him here.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I remember when Rick and I first started working together, I said, this is Rick Hall, he's our traffic engineer. He was like, oh, no, I'm not your traffic engineer, I am a transportation engineer. There's a difference. And I'm talking about all modes, not just cars, and hopefully we're not causing much traffic, so. All right, well, thank you all so much. I appreciate it as always. I've got lots of good notes. We have another meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to talk about conservation, sustainability, all of that stuff, as if we haven't talked about that yet. But hopefully we'll get into the details, and I hope it's gonna be an even bigger group for that topic. I bet we can get a good turnout. Then we have at 1 o'clock meeting to talk about neighborhood and community character and design.
I went through the roundabout with all the yellow flashing beacons on it,
Yeah.
and I kind of like it.
That's
Well, I like the operations of it. It's a little gaudy. So hopefully people will learn how to use it.
Which one has the beacon?
Sadler,
It's right down the side.
Sadler and Fletcher.
Not everybody follows it.
Oh, that's Sadler, that's not a roundabout, that's a unmarked,
Pedestrian crossing. Yeah, and that's why it's got the
That's
flashing.
not a roundabout. That's a
That's a